The massive doors of the Galactic Council chamber slid shut with a heavy thud that echoed through the vast hall. Commander Lee Tae-ho stood in the center of the room surrounded by alien beings who towered over him like living mountains. Their eyes gleamed with satisfaction as they looked down at the human diplomat who had walked so willingly into their trapped chancellor. Sendar of the Vorthak Empire leaned forward in his crystal throne. His scaled face twisted into what passed for a smile. Among his species, the reptilian alien was twice the size of any human, and his voice boomed across the chamber when he spoke. You humans think you are so clever coming here with your talk of peace and cooperation, but we know what you really want, Lee. Tae-ho remained perfectly calm, his hands clasped behind his back as he studied the faces around him. The council chamber was designed to intimidate with its soaring ceilings and holographic displays showing the military might of dozens of alien civilizations. Each species represented here commanded fleets that could reduce entire star systems to ash, yet the humans showed no fear. The Scaled Republic ambassador, a creature that looked like a cross between a snake and a spider, clicked his mandibles together in amusement. Look at this pathetic creature, he hissed to his neighbors. He stands there like a lost child. Does he not understand that he will never leave this station alive? Energy restraints suddenly materialized around Lee Tae-ho's wrists, bands of crackling blue light that could hold back a charging war beast. The human looked down at them with mild curiosity, as if they were nothing more than interesting jewelry. He tested their strength with a gentle pull, then nodded, approvingly at their construction. Very impressive technology, Lee said in his soft voice. I have always admired the engineering skills of the council species. Your energy matrices are particularly elegant in their design. The aliens exchanged glances, clearly not expecting such a calm response from their prisoner ambassador. Korth rose from his seat, his multiple eyes focusing on the human with predatory interest. You will not be so calm when we begin extracting information from you, human. Your species thinks they can simply waltz into galactic politics and demand equal treatment. But you are nothing more than primitives who got lucky with a few inventions. Lee tilted his head slightly as if considering these words. That is an interesting perspective, he replied. I suppose every species has its own way of viewing galactic relations. Perhaps we could discuss these differences over dinner. I find that most misunderstandings can be resolved through honest conversation. The laughter that erupted from the alien delegates was harsh and mocking. Chancellor Zendar slammed his massive fist on the arm of his throne, creating a sound like thunder. Dinner, he roared. This creature thinks we are going to have dinner with him. Guards, take him to Detention Cell 7 and make sure he understands his situation. 4 heavily armed aliens moved forward to escort Lee away. Each one carried weapons that could vaporize a human in seconds. Yet their prisoner walked between them as calmly as if he were being shown to a hotel room. He even nodded politely to the guards and commented on the impressive architecture of the corridor they traveled through. The detention cell was a sterile white cube with walls that hummed with energy barriers. Strong enough to contain a rampaging Kresh warrior, the cell had never failed to hold any prisoner. The guard shoved Lee inside and activated the additional security measures that would prevent any escape attempt. Lee examined his new quarters with the same mild interest he had shown the restraints. He tested the walls, checked the ventilation system, and even complimented the guards on the efficiency of their security protocols. The aliens found his behavior bizarre but dismissed it as the reaction of a primitive mind, trying to cope with overwhelming circumstances. Hours passed and the alien guards settled into their routine patrol patterns. They had guarded thousands of prisoners over the years, and the humans seemed no different from any other defeated enemy. He sat quietly in his cell, occasionally asking polite questions about the station or making small talk about the weather on their home worlds. What the guards did not notice was how Lee Tae-ho's questions followed a very specific pattern. Each innocent inquiry was designed to extract valuable information about the station's operations, security procedures, and personnel rotations. When he asked about the guard shift changes, he was mapping their security protocols. When he complimented their uniforms, he was identifying rank structures and command hierarchies. As the station entered its night cycle, Lee made a simple request to the duty officer. Could I perhaps send a brief message to my family on Earth, he asked. They will be worried if I do not check in, and I would hate for them to think something has happened to me." The request seemed so pathetically human that the guards found it amusing. The communication terminal was activated, and Lee spoke briefly into the recording device. "Hello, my dear family," he said in a warm, friendly voice. "I wanted to let you know that I am visiting some old friends here at the council station. The hospitality has been wonderful, though I may be running a bit late for dinner. Please do not wait up for me, and tell everyone I said hello to the alien guards." It sounded like exactly what they expected from a homesick human diplomat. They transmitted the message without a second thought, completely unaware that every word had been carefully chosen. The seemingly innocent phrases were actually coded military terminology that would be recognized by very specific people across human space on Mars. In a heavily fortified military complex, Admiral Park Ji-woo was reviewing fleet deployment reports when the communication arrived. He was taking a sip of coffee when he heard Lee Tae-ho's voice speaking those particular words in that specific tone. The coffee cup slipped from his fingers and shattered on the floor as the blood drained from his face. Captain Kim Min-ho rushed to his superior's side, concerned by the admiral's sudden pallor. "Sir, are you all right?" he asked. "What was in that message?" Park Ji-woo stared at the communication display with wide eyes, his voice barely a whisper when he finally spoke. "That was not just any diplomat, Kim," he said. "That was Ghost." Meanwhile, on the frontier colony of New Seoul, a group of retired soldiers were sharing drinks in their usual cantina when the news broadcast mentioned a diplomatic incident at the Galactic Council Station. Former Sergeant Major Choi Hyun-soo had been laughing at a joke when he heard the details. His laughter died instantly, and his weathered face went pale. The other veterans in the bar noticed the change in their old comrade's demeanor. "What is it?" Hyun-soo asked his friend Bae Won-shik. "What has got you looking like you have seen a ghost?" Choi Hyun-soo set down his drink with a trembling hand and looked around the room. At faces he had known for decades. "That is exactly what I have seen," he whispered. "They have got Ghost." The other veterans fell silent, their own faces reflecting the same horror they saw in their old sergeant major's eyes. They all knew that call sign. They all remembered what it meant. And they all understood that the Galactic Council had just made the biggest mistake in their long history. Across human space, the coded message was spreading through networks that most people did not even know existed. Old soldiers were putting down their tools and reaching for weapons they had hoped never to use again. Intelligence officers were activating protocols that had been dormant for years. Fleet commanders were quietly moving their ships into positions that would allow for rapid deployment. The Galactic Council thought they had captured a simple diplomat, but the truth was far more terrifying. They had taken hostage the most dangerous human who had ever lived, a man whose very name was whispered in fear by alien species across the galaxy. They had caged the Ghost, and now they were about to discover why that had been humanity's secret weapon during the bloodiest war in galactic history. Admiral Park Ji-woo stood frozen in his office on Mars, staring at the communication display as if it contained news of his own death. The broken coffee cup lay forgotten at his feet, while his aide, Captain Kim Min-ho, waited for an explanation that would make sense of his superior's shocking reaction. The admiral's hands were shaking as he reached for his secure communication console. "Sir, what is happening?" Kim asked, his voice filled with concern. "Who is Ghost, and why does a simple diplomatic message have you so frightened?" Park Ji-woo looked at his young aide with eyes that had seen too much war and too much death. Then he began typing access codes into his terminal codes that had not been used for over 5 years. On the screen appeared a file marked with the highest security classifications in human military history. The header read Operation Ghost Protocol, and beneath it was a single photograph of Commander Lee Tae-ho, taken during his military service years. The man in the picture looked exactly the same as the diplomat who had just been captured, but his eyes held a coldness that could freeze stars. Kim leaned forward to read the file, but Admiral Park closed it before he could see more than the first few lines. "That information is classified beyond your clearance level," the Admiral said. "But I will tell you what I can. Ghost was not just a soldier during the border wars, Kim. He was death incarnate, walking among our enemies like a shadow that could kill." The young captain had heard stories about the border wars when humanity fought desperately for recognition and survival against the Kresh Empire. But those battles seemed like ancient history to his generation. The older officers sometimes spoke in hushed tones about legendary figures who had turned the tide of impossible battles, but Kim had always assumed those stories were exaggerated. Meanwhile, on the frontier world of New Seoul, the cantina had fallen completely silent as the full implications of Choi Hyunsu's words sank in. The retired soldiers looked at each other with expressions of disbelief and growing dread. Each man in that room had served during the border wars, and they all remembered the whispered reports that came from the deepest battlefields. Bai Wan-shik was the first to break the silence, his voice hoarse with memory. "Do you remember the Kresh fortress on Kepler 7? He asked slowly. "The one that held 300 of our people prisoner. The entire Third Fleet could not get near it because of their orbital defenses. But somehow Ghost got inside." Another veteran nodded grimly. "I was on the rescue ships that picked up the survivors," he said. "They told us that the Kresh commanders started disappearing one by one. Their security footage showed nothing but empty corridors, yet their officers were found dead in locked rooms with no sign of how anyone got inside." The stories began flowing then, as the old soldiers shared memories they had tried to forget. Captain Song Haijin had been serving aboard the flagship Seoul's Pride when Ghost single-handedly infiltrated a Kresh battle station. The enemy fleet never knew he was there until their command structure collapsed from within, and their ships began firing on each other in confusion. "I saw the after-action reports," Song said quietly. "Ghost spent 3 days inside that station, moving through their maintenance shafts and service corridors. He learned their language, studied their psychology, and turned their own paranoia against them. By the time he was done, they were so terrified of shadows that they abandoned an entire star system rather than face him again." On Earth, in the deepest levels of military intelligence headquarters, Director Nam Soo Jin was waking up officers who had been retired for years. The Ghost protocol required specific personnel, and most of them had tried to forget the skills that made them necessary. Her first call was to Master Sergeant Bae Soo Jin, who had been Ghost's right hand during the worst battles of the war. Bae answered her phone with the calm voice of someone who had been expecting this call for years. "The message came through," she said before Nam could speak. "He is compromised and activated the emergency signal." "How long before the council realizes what they have done?" "Not long enough," Nam replied. "I need your team ready for immediate deployment. The old unit, the ones who know how Ghost operates. They scattered after the war, but I know you kept track of them." "Yes," Bae confirmed. "They are all still alive, and they all remember their oath to never leave Ghost behind. Give me 6 hours and we will be ready to deploy." The communication networks buzzed with coded messages that looked like routine military traffic to anyone without the proper codes. But to those who knew what to look for, the messages painted a picture of massive mobilization. Human fleets began moving toward the Galactic core under the pretense of training exercises. Admiral Chen Dong, Ho commander of the 6th Fleet, received orders that made his blood run cold. "Position your ships for Operation Broken Arrow." He read, "Execute on my signal, and remember, the rules of engagement for Ghost recovery operations are different from standard protocols. The safety of the target takes precedence over everything else, including civilian casualties." Similar messages went out to special forces units across human space. Teams that had been disbanded after the border wars suddenly found themselves recalled to active duty. Veterans who had tried to live normal civilian lives dropped everything when they received the activation codes. They all remembered their training, and they all knew what those codes meant. On the mining station, Cygnus Alpha, former Corporal Lee Min-jun was working his shift in the deep tunnels when his personal communicator chirped with an incoming message. He read the brief text, and his mining laser slipped from suddenly nerveless fingers. The message was simple: "Ghost. Protocol active, report for immediate deployment, coordinates follow." Around him, other miners were receiving similar messages. Men and women who had seemed like ordinary workers revealed themselves to be sleeping agents waiting for a call that might never come. They looked at each other with grim understanding and began making preparations to leave. The galaxy was about to remember why humanity earned their place through warfare, not diplomacy. Dr. Park So Young was in her research laboratory, on Titan studying alien technology, when her communication system activated with priority codes she had not seen in years. The message was brief, but it made her hands shake as she read it. Ghost captured by Galactic Council, request immediate deployment of all assets for recovery operation. She looked around her peaceful laboratory, knowing it would be the last normal moment she would have for a very long time. The activation continued across human space, touching lives that had been rebuilt after. The war former intelligence officers left their teaching jobs. Special Forces veterans abandoned their businesses and families. Pilots who had flown suicide missions during the darkest days of the border wars climbed back into cockpits they had hoped never to see again. Each person who received the Ghost Protocol activation knew exactly what it meant. Humanity's most dangerous weapon was in enemy hands, and every resource of human civilization would be mobilized to get him back. Not because he was valuable though he was, but because of what he represented, and what the aliens would discover if they dug too deeply into his true identity. The Galactic Council thought they had captured a diplomat, but they were about to learn that they had taken hostage the one human whose loss would unite every faction of humanity in a war of vengeance. They had caged the ghost and awakened a sleeping giant that would not rest until their greatest hero was free or their enemies were destroyed. The next morning brought a sense of smug satisfaction to the Galactic Council leadership as they gathered in their private chambers to discuss their human prisoner. Chancellor Zendar lounged in his crystal throne, looking pleased with himself. While other council members shared similar expressions of triumph, they had spent the night congratulating each other on their clever trap and discussing how they would use their hostage to humble humanity. Ambassador Korth clicked his mandibles, together in what passed for laughter among his species. "Did you see how calm the creature remained when we placed him in detention?" He said to his colleagues, "Either humans are too stupid to understand danger, or this one is already broken from fear. I suspect it is both." The reptilian delegates nodded in agreement, sharing stories about other primitive species they had conquered in the past. Each tale was designed to reinforce their belief that humans were just another weak race that had gotten lucky with a few technological discoveries. They spoke freely in front of the monitoring systems, knowing their prisoner could hear everything they said in his detention cell. Li Tae-ho sat quietly on the narrow bed, listening to every word that came through the communication speakers. The aliens assumed he could not understand their various languages, but his training had included linguistic preparation for encounters with dozens of species. He absorbed every detail about their military capabilities, political structures, and personal weaknesses. When Guard Captain Vorthak entered the cell to deliver the morning meal, he found his prisoner doing what appeared to be simple stretching exercises. Lee smiled warmly at the alien and thanked him politely for the food. The guard was surprised by the human's pleasant demeanor and found himself drawn into conversation. "You seem very calm for someone in your position," Vorthak observed in his broken standard Galactic. "Are you not afraid of what might happen to you?" Lee looked up from his meal with genuine curiosity in his eyes. "Should I be afraid?" he asked. "I have found that fear usually makes situations worse than they need to be. Besides, you have all been very professional in your treatment." The guard was taken aback by this response. Most prisoners either raged against their captivity or cowered in terror, but this human seemed genuinely interested in having a normal conversation. "Perhaps you could tell me about your home," Worldly continued. "I have always been fascinated by different cultures and ways of life." Orther found himself describing the crystal cities of his world and the complex social hierarchies of his people. Lee listened with apparent fascination, asking thoughtful questions about their architecture, government structure, and military organization. To the guard, it seemed like innocent curiosity from a diplomat trying to pass time. What Vorthak did not realize was that every question served a specific intelligence-gathering purpose. When Lee asked about the beautiful crystal spires, he was learning about defensive capabilities. When he inquired about social ranks, he was mapping command structures. When he expressed interest in their military traditions, he was discovering tactical doctrine and strategic thinking. Similar conversations took place throughout the day as different guards and officers visited the human prisoner. Each alien left these encounters feeling oddly positive about the experience. The human was so polite and interested in their cultures that they found themselves sharing more information than regulations allowed. Lieutenant Zek Ran told Lee about the station's impressive defensive systems during what he thought was casual conversation. The human seemed genuinely amazed by the technical sophistication of the energy shields and weapons arrays. His questions about how such systems were maintained and operated seemed like the natural curiosity of someone impressed by superior technology. "I can see why the Council has maintained peace for so long," Lee said admiringly. "With defenses like these, who would dare challenge your authority?" Zek Ran puffed up with pride and began explaining even more details about their military capabilities, completely missing the analytical gleam in the human's eyes. Chancellor Zendar received regular reports about the prisoner's behavior and was pleased by what he heard. The human was cooperative, talkative, and showing proper respect for Council authority. This confirmed his belief that humans were a submissive species that could be easily controlled through displays of superior power. The official response from Earth arrived that afternoon, delivered through standard diplomatic channels. The message was filled with formal language expressing concern for their citizens' welfare and requesting negotiations to resolve the situation peacefully. Chancellor Zendar read it with growing satisfaction, as each paragraph seemed to confirm human weakness. "Look at this pathetic groveling," he announced to the assembled council members. "They beg us to consider their citizens' rights and speak of mutual understanding. They offer to discuss territorial concessions if we will only treat their representative with dignity." How wonderfully predictable. What the Council leadership failed to recognize was that the Earth response contained layers of meaning that only military intelligence specialists would understand. Mixed in with the diplomatic language were detailed tactical updates, troop movements, and strategic preparations disguised as bureaucratic terminology. The message was actually a comprehensive briefing for their captured operative. Lee received the diplomatic correspondence as part of his prisoner privileges, and read it with the same mild interest he showed everything else. The guards watching him saw a homesick diplomat reading news from his government, but they missed the subtle changes in his posture and breathing that indicated he was absorbing critical intelligence. The message told him that Admiral Park had positioned the 6th Fleet for rapid deployment. Master Sergeant Bay had assembled the old unit and was standing by for insertion orders. Special assets were moving into position throughout Council space, disguised as merchant vessels and research expeditions. The Ghost Protocol was fully activated that evening. As the station settled into its night cycle, Lee made another seemingly innocent request to his guards. The unfamiliar sounds of the station were keeping him awake. He explained. Could they perhaps provide something to help him sleep? The guards found this request endearingly human and readily agreed to provide a mild sedative. What they did not understand was that they had just given a master infiltrator exactly what he needed to begin the next phase of his plan. The sedative they provided contained compounds that would react with human biochemistry in very specific ways. When combined with meditation techniques that most aliens had never heard of, as Lee prepared for sleep that night, he reflected on how perfectly everything was proceeding. The Council had underestimated humanity so completely that they were essentially helping him gather intelligence and prepare for his mission. They saw weakness where there was patient planning. They mistook courtesy for submission and calm preparation for defeated acceptance. The aliens had no idea that their prisoner was not really captured at all. He was exactly where he needed to be, learning everything he needed to know and waiting for the right moment to remind the galaxy why his species had earned their place through strength, not luck. The Ghost was patient, but he would not remain hidden much longer. Tomorrow would bring the next phase of his plan, and the Galactic Council would begin to understand that they had not captured a diplomat at all. They had invited their worst nightmare into the heart of their most secure facility, and given him access to everything he needed to bring their carefully ordered world crashing down around their ears. The station's night cycle brought a false sense of security to the Council's security forces as the corridors dimmed and most personnel retired to their quarters. In the detention block, Guard Captain Vorthak made his final rounds, checking on the various prisoners held in the facility's maximum security cells. When he reached the human cell, he found Lee Tae-ho sleeping peacefully on the narrow bed. The sedative had worked perfectly, the guard thought to himself as he observed the slow, steady breathing of their captive. The human looked completely harmless, curled up under the thin blanket with his eyes closed and his face relaxed in what appeared to be deep, natural sleep. Vorthak made a note in his log and continued his patrol, satisfied that their most important prisoner posed no threat. What the guard could not see was that beneath his closed eyelids, Lee's eyes were moving in the precise patterns of someone in a state of controlled meditation. The sedative he had requested contained compounds that, when combined with specific breathing techniques, allowed him to slow his vital signs while maintaining complete awareness of his surroundings. This was a skill Lee had mastered during the border wars when deep cover operations required him to appear dead or unconscious while enemy forces searched for him. He had once spent 18 hours in this state while Kresh soldiers stepped over his apparently lifeless body, never knowing that humanity's most dangerous weapon was listening to every word they spoke. At precisely 3 a.m. station time, Lee opened his eyes and began the systematic process of freeing himself from the energy restraints. The aliens believed their technology was foolproof, but they had never encountered someone who understood that every system had vulnerabilities that could be exploited with patience and precise knowledge. For hours, Lee had been making microscopic movements, working his hands within the energy field in ways that gradually weakened the containment matrix. His seemingly casual questions about the station's defensive systems had not just been intelligence gathering, they had been reconnaissance for this exact moment. He knew exactly how the restraints functioned and how to defeat them. The energy bands dissolved silently around his wrists as Lee applied pressure to the specific points where the containment field was weakest. He stood slowly, testing his freedom of movement and listening carefully to the sounds of the station around him. Every footstep, every mechanical hum, every shift change was part of a pattern he had been memorizing since his arrival, moving with the fluid silence that had earned him his legendary callsign. Lee approached the cell door and began working on the locking mechanism. This was not a matter of brute force or advanced technology, but rather the application of knowledge gained through careful observation and analysis. He had watched the guards operate this system dozens of times and understood its weaknesses. The door slid open with barely a whisper of sound, and Lee stepped into the corridor where the night shift security patrol was following their predictable routine. The first guard never knew what hit him as Lee's hand found the nerve cluster that would render him unconscious without permanent harm. The alien crumpled silently to the floor, his weapon never clearing its holster. The second guard turned at the sound of his partner's fall and caught a glimpse of movement in the dim corridor lighting. Before he could raise an alarm or draw his weapon, Lee was upon him using pressure points that few aliens even knew existed. The guard's last conscious thought was confusion at how something so impossible could be happening. Lee quickly stripped the unconscious guards of their weapons, access cards, and communication devices. He dragged their bodies into empty storage compartments where they would not be discovered until the next shift change, in several hours. Then he began his systematic infiltration of the station's critical systems, moving through maintenance shafts and service corridors like a shadow. Every step was calculated, every movement served a purpose. This was not the desperate flight of an escaped prisoner, but the methodical advance of a predator who had finally decided to reveal his true nature. Lee had spent days mapping the station's layout through casual conversation and observation. Now that knowledge guided him through passages that most of the crew did not even know existed. In the station's primary communication center night shift, technicians monitored the routine traffic flowing between council worlds and military installations. They noticed brief fluctuations in their systems, microsecond interruptions that their automated systems dismissed as routine maintenance cycles. What they did not realize was that those tiny windows of opportunity were being used by an expert to insert code into their networks. Lee moved through the communication arrays like a ghost, leaving behind carefully crafted programs that would give him complete control of their systems when activated. The code was so sophisticated that it appeared to be part of the station's normal operating software, hiding in plain sight among millions of lines of legitimate programming. From the communication center, Lee proceeded to the environmental controls, where he made subtle adjustments that would not be noticed for hours. The station's Atmospheric systems were designed with multiple redundancies and safety protocols. But Lee understood how to work within those systems to create exactly the conditions he would need. Later, his next stop was the power distribution center where he accessed the control systems that regulated energy flow throughout the station. Again, his modifications were subtle and would appear to be routine adjustments to anyone who discovered them later. But when activated, they would give him the ability to control everything from lighting to life support with the touch of a button. The security center required more direct action as Lee needed access to the monitoring systems that tracked movement throughout the station. The lone technician on duty was reading a datapad when a shadow fell across his workstation. He looked up to see a human figure standing beside him, and his mouth opened to sound an alarm that would never come. Minutes later, the technician was unconscious and secured in a storage locker while Lee worked at his console. The security cameras throughout the station developed carefully placed blind spots that would allow movement without detection. The sensor grids that monitored the corridors began reporting false readings that would mask any unusual activity. Lee spent over an hour in the security center, learning everything about the station's defensive capabilities and personnel deployment. He memorized guard rotations, weapons placements, and emergency protocols. Then he uploaded his own surveillance programs that would monitor council activities while appearing to be routine security software. As dawn approached, Lee made his way back through the maze of service passages toward his detention cell. Behind him, he left a trail of subtle modifications and hidden programs that had turned the station's own systems into weapons that could be used against its operators. The council's most secure facility had been thoroughly compromised by a single human, who moved like smoke through their defenses, returning to his cell. Lee reactivated the energy restraints and resumed his position on the narrow bed. When the day shift guards arrived for their morning inspection, they found him exactly as they expected, a sleeping human diplomat who appeared harmless and contained. They had no idea that their prisoner had spent the night transforming their impregnable fortress into a trap that could be sprung at any moment. The ghost had been patient, but his time for hiding was nearly over. Soon the Galactic Council would discover that they had not captured a diplomat at all, but had invited their worst nightmare into the heart of their power. The station's systems now belonged to humanity's most dangerous weapon, and when he chose to reveal himself, the aliens would learn why his species had earned their place through strength rather than mercy. Lee closed his eyes and resumed his meditative state, listening to the familiar sounds of the station coming alive around him. Everything was proceeding according to plan, and soon his old team would arrive to help him complete a mission that would send shockwaves throughout the galaxy. The Council had underestimated humanity for the last time. The morning shift brought chaos to the Galactic Council station, as systems that had functioned perfectly for decades began failing in ways that made no sense to the technical staff. Communications arrays developed mysterious interference patterns that came and went without warning. Security cameras displayed static-filled images at random intervals, and environmental controls started fluctuating in patterns that made the alien crew increasingly uncomfortable. Chief Engineer Cole Vex scratched his scaled head as he stared at diagnostic readings that defied explanation. Every system showed green operational status, yet problems kept cascading through the station's infrastructure. The failures seemed unrelated, but something about their timing felt deliberate, as if someone was testing the station's responses to various forms of stress. "We need to run a complete diagnostic on all primary systems," he announced to his staff. "These fluctuations are not random, but I cannot identify the source." The other technicians nodded and began their procedures, never suspecting that every action they took was being monitored by programs hidden deep within their own networks. Chancellor Zendar convened an emergency session in the main council chamber as reports of technical difficulties poured in from across the station. The massive alien leader was growing frustrated by the disruptions, but remained convinced that their human prisoner posed no threat after all. How could a single captive diplomat affect complex systems he had never seen? The session was interrupted by urgent reports from the station's sensor operators, who had detected an anomaly in nearby space. What appeared to be a small asteroid field had somehow shifted position, overnight moving closer to the council station on a trajectory that made no astronomical sense. The duty officer reported this as a curiosity possibly caused by gravitational fluctuations from the system's twin sun scanner operator, NextDAR Enhanced. The display showing what looked like ordinary space debris tumbling slowly through the void. Yet something about the formation troubled him. The asteroids were maintaining too perfect a distance from each other, and their rotation patterns seemed almost choreographed. He made a note to monitor the field more closely but classified it as low priority. What the alien crew could not detect was that they were looking at the most advanced stealth technology in human space. The asteroid field was, actually, a fleet of human warships using holographic camouflage and sensor-dampening fields to appear as harmless debris. Each fake asteroid contained enough firepower to level a small moon, but they remained hidden in plain sight. Ambassador Korth became increasingly agitated as reports arrived from across the galaxy. Several council member species were reporting unusual activities in their border regions. Ships had vanished from long-range sensors without distress signals, communication. Blackouts were affecting strategic systems, and unexplained technical failures were plaguing military installations throughout Council space. The pattern seemed random to most observers, but those with extensive military experience began recognizing the signs of a coordinated operation. Someone was conducting reconnaissance missions and preparing for something much larger. The timing of these activities coincided perfectly with the capture of the human diplomat, but surely that was just coincidence on. The bridge of the disguised flagship Soul's Revenge Admiral Park Ji-woo studied tactical displays that showed the positions of Council fleets throughout the sector. His ships had been maneuvering for 18 hours using trade routes and civilian flight paths to avoid detection. Now they were positioned to strike at every major military installation within 3 light years. "Sir, we are receiving the preliminary signal from Ghost," Admiral Park's communications officer announced. "The target has confirmed his position and reports that primary objectives are proceeding on schedule. Fleet Admiral Song requests permission to begin Phase 2 of the operation." "Not yet," Park replied, studying the holographic display that showed the Council station suspended in space like a glittering jewel. "Ghost will signal when he is ready for extraction. Until then, we maintain position and prepare for rapid deployment." He paused, then added, "Make sure all ships understand the rules of engagement. Ghost's safety takes priority over everything else, including our own survival back on the Council station." Lee Tae-ho continued his patient performance as the confused diplomat, while secretly monitoring every aspect of the facility's operations. Through his hidden programs, he watched the technical staff struggle with system failures. He had carefully orchestrated. Each malfunction was designed to test their responses and identify additional weaknesses. The supply ship, Peaceful Trader, requested permission to dock at the station's commercial bay, carrying what appeared to be routine cargo for the facility's staff. The manifest showed food supplies, replacement parts, and personal items for the various alien crew members. The Council's security forces cleared the vessel for docking without realizing they had just allowed humanity's most elite strike team to walk through their front door, hidden among the cargo containers. Master Sergeant Bae Soo-jin and her hand-picked specialists began their own infiltration. The team consisted of veterans who had served alongside Ghost during the most brutal campaigns of the border wars. Each member was a legend in their own right, trained in techniques that most alien species considered impossible. For biological beings to Master Sergeant Lee Won-ho moved through the station's service tunnels like liquid shadow, his enhanced reflexes and training allowing him to avoid every sensor and patrol. The aliens had never encountered infiltration techniques. Developed specifically for their technology, and their security systems were useless against someone who understood their blind spots. Corporal Park Hae-young took position in the communication center disguised as a maintenance worker. Her false identification passed every security check because it had been created using the station's own personnel database. The aliens never suspected that their newest employee was actually a combat veteran who could kill with her bare hands. The team moved into position throughout the station, each member taking control of critical systems while appearing to be nothing more than ordinary workers and crew members. They had done this type of operation dozens of times during the war, but never in such a target-rich environment surrounded by enemies who had no idea what was coming. As evening approached, Lee received the signal he had been waiting for, a brief fluctuation in the station's power grid that told him his team was in position and ready to begin the final phase. The Ghost had been patient and careful, but now it was time to remind the Galactic Council why humanity had earned their seat at the table through blood and victory. He stood in his cell and spoke a single word in a language the guards did not recognize. To them, it sounded like he was simply stretching or expressing mild discomfort. But throughout the station, that word activated systems he had spent days preparing, programs that would turn the Council's own technology against them. The nightmare was about to begin, and the aliens still believed they held all the power. They had no idea that their prisoner had never been captured at all, but had been conducting the most sophisticated intelligence-gathering operation in galactic history from inside their most secure facility. The Ghost was ready to reveal himself, and the Council was about to learn that some humans were far more dangerous than they could possibly imagine. At exactly midnight station time, the final phase began with a moment so simple it seemed almost anticlimactic. Lee Tae-ho's cell door slid open silently, not because of any dramatic escape attempt, but because he had maintained control of the station's systems for the past 18 hours. He stepped into the corridor where Master Sergeant Bae Soo-jin waited with his equipment, her expression showing the mixture of relief and anticipation that came from reuniting with an old comrade in arms. Ghost, she said simply, using the call sign that had struck fear into the hearts of alien commanders across the galaxy. Good to see you again, Sarge Lee replied, as he accepted the tactical gear she handed him. How is the team? Bae smiled grimly. All in position, and ready to show these aliens what happens when they mess with humanity. Within minutes, the station transformed from a symbol of galactic authority into a demonstration of human military precision that would be studied for generations. Lee and his team moved through the facility like a force of nature, neutralizing security personnel with non-lethal methods that left the aliens unconscious but unharmed. This was not about revenge, but about sending a message that would echo across the galaxy. The first indication that something was wrong came when Guard Captain Vorthak failed to respond to his scheduled check-in. The duty officer tried to raise him on the communication system but received only static. The security cameras in Detention Block 7 showed empty corridors with no sign of the missing guard or their human prisoner. Emergency protocols activated automatically as alien security forces rushed toward the detention area, but they found themselves moving through corridors where the lighting kept dimming and environmental controls fluctuated wildly. The station's own systems seemed to be working against them, creating confusion and disorientation among the defenders. Chancellor Zendar was awakened by urgent alarms echoing through his private quarters. He reached for his personal communicator to demand answers, but found that his door would not respond to his access codes. The massive alien pounded on the reinforced barrier with his fists, but succeeded only in bruising his hands against metal that had suddenly become his prison. Similar scenes played out across the station as council members discovered they were trapped in their own quarters by technology. They thought they controlled Ambassador. Korth frantically tried to override his door systems using emergency codes, but every attempt was met with gentle chimes, indicating access denied. The aliens were not prisoners in the traditional sense, but they were completely at the mercy of the species they had underestimated. In the main communication center, Lee appeared like a ghost materializing from shadows that had hidden him perfectly. The night shift operators looked up in shock as the human they thought was safely contained walked calmly to their primary console. The lead technician reached for his weapon, but found his hand frozen by a nerve strike that left him conscious but unable to move. Lee activated the station's galaxy-wide communication array with codes he had observed. During his supposed captivity, his message began broadcasting simultaneously across known space, reaching every major government and military installation from the galactic core to the outer rim territories. Speaking in perfect dialects of dozens of alien languages, he delivered words that would reshape interstellar politics. Citizens of the galaxy, he began, his voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who had faced death among the stars and emerged victorious. I am Commander Lee Tae-ho of the Human Diplomatic Corps, but you may know me by another name. During the border wars, I was called Ghost, and today I speak to remind you all of an important truth. The message continued as Lee explained that humanity valued diplomacy and peaceful coexistence but would not tolerate being threatened or manipulated. The demonstration taking place on the council station served as proof that human patience should never be mistaken for weakness. Every system he had infiltrated, every security measure he had bypassed, every impossible thing he had accomplished, was evidence that humanity had earned their place through capability. Not charity. We do not seek dominance over other species, Lee said as alien leaders across the galaxy listened in stunned silence. We offer friendship, cooperation, and mutual prosperity, but let no one mistake our desire for peace as inability to wage war. The Council chose to take hostage a representative of humanity, and in doing so they have learned that some of our diplomats are also our warriors, as his team prepared for extraction. Lee left behind detailed technical reports showing exactly how they had compromised the station's defenses. These files were not meant to embarrass the Council, but to educate them. The documents included recommendations for improving security protocols, preventing similar infiltrations, and establishing better communication between species. The reports also contained a comprehensive analysis of every Council, military installation, fleet deployment, and strategic capability that the Ghost had observed during his mission. This was not shared as a threat, but as proof of what human intelligence gathering could accomplish when properly motivated. The message was clear: humanity knew everything about their neighbors and had chosen to remain peaceful. Master Sergeant Bay appeared at Lee's shoulder as he finished uploading the files. "Ghost, we need to go," she said quietly. The extraction window is closing, and Admiral Park reports that Council reinforcements are beginning to mobilize. Lee nodded and began the final phase of their departure, activating programs that would restore station systems to normal operation. The aliens would wake to find their facility undamaged, their people unharmed, and their security intact. But they would also discover that every classified database had been copied, every secret installation had been mapped, and every military weakness had been catalogued. The Ghost had been inside their most secure facility and taken everything he wanted as Lee and his team vanished as silently as they had arrived. The station's communication systems carried one final message to the assembled Council members. This operation was conducted to demonstrate human capabilities, not to threaten or harm anyone. The next time you consider taking action against humanity, remember that our diplomats, our merchants, and our civilians may be more than they appear. The Ghost Protocol had been activated and executed flawlessly, leaving behind a galaxy that finally understood why humans were considered the most dangerous species in known space. Not because they were the strongest or most technologically advanced, but because they combined intelligence, determination, and tactical brilliance in ways that made them unpredictable and unstoppable. When properly motivated, Chancellor Zendar emerged from his quarters hours later to find his security chief waiting with a report that would haunt his dreams. The human prisoner had not escaped. He had never been captured at all. Everything from his initial detention to his final departure had been a carefully orchestrated intelligence operation that demonstrated capabilities far beyond anything the Council had imagined possible. The story concluded with Lee returning to his diplomatic duties, once again appearing as nothing more than a pleasant, cultured representative of his species. But now every alien government knew the truth behind humanity's civilized exterior lay warriors so sophisticated that they could infiltrate the most secure facilities in the galaxy and leave without anyone knowing they had been there until it was far too late. The message had been delivered clearly and unmistakably. Humanity chose peace, but they were prepared for war. The Ghost had reminded the galaxy that sometimes the most dangerous enemies were those who smiled politely while planning your destruction. The Council would never again underestimate the species that had earned their place among the stars through blood courage and the quiet confidence of those who knew they could win any fight they chose to start.